I never imagined that the woman who looked at me with such disdain would one day be the only source of heat keeping me alive in a freezing room. Before I tell you how my worst nightmare became my greatest salvation, I invite you to follow the Forbidden Romances channel to hear more stories about loves that defy logic. My name is Maya. I am 26 years old, and until that snowy Tuesday, my life was a constant race against bankruptcy. I am a junior assistant at a major marketing firm in Chicago, which basically means I am invisible, except when someone needs to blame me for a mistake I did not commit. The day began with that kind of gray sky that promises chaos, but my personal storm had arrived earlier, right on my cell phone screen. I was standing on the icy sidewalk in front of the pharmacy, staring at the notification from my banking app that pulsed like a red alert signal. Transaction declined. It was the third month in a row that I had to choose between paying the rent for my studio apartment or buying the specific medication for my grandmother's early onset Alzheimer's. She raised me when my parents left, and now, seeing her forget my name was painful, but seeing her suffer without treatment was unbearable. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat, feeling the cutting wind pierce through my thin coat, a piece I bought at a thrift store 5 years ago. I needed this job more than I needed air, even if the salary was just enough to keep my head above water in an expensive city like Chicago. I put my phone in my pocket, counting the coins I had left for a coffee, knowing my account was in the negative again. I could not ask for an advance. The last time I tried, human resources looked at me with pity, which is worse than contempt. A black car, sleek and silent as a predator, pulled up to the curb, splashing dirty slush onto my boots. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing a face that could have been sculpted from marble. Victoria Sterling, my boss. At 42 years old, she was a legend in the industry, known for a brilliant mind and a heart that everyone assumed did not exist. She wore oversized sunglasses and a scarf that probably cost more than my entire annual rent. "You are late, Maya," she said, her voice low and devoid of any emotion, without even bothering to look directly at me. I checked my watch. I was exactly on time. But arguing with Victoria was like trying to punch a concrete wall. You only hurt yourself. I opened the door and slid onto the leather seat, the smell of a new car and expensive perfume enveloping me immediately, an aroma of sandalwood and something cold, metallic. The contrast between the freezing cold outside and the controlled climate inside the car made me dizzy for a second. I murmured an apology I did not feel and buckled my seatbelt, trying to shrink into the seat to take up as little space as possible. Victoria was typing furiously on her tablet, her manicured fingers moving with terrifying precision. She did not ask how I was, did not comment on the weather. To her, I was just another tool in her arsenal, as functional as the steering wheel or the GPS. I looked at her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, her platinum blonde hair cut in a perfect bob that never moved out of place. We were heading to a crucial meeting with an industrial client in the suburbs, a contract that could define the company's quarter. I had spent the last 3 nights awake preparing the presentation, reviewing every chart, every comma, terrified of the possibility of missing something. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my stomach growled quietly, reminding me that I had skipped breakfast to save money. Victoria, of course, looked like she had slept 10 hours in Egyptian cotton sheets and eaten a feast of fruit and yogurt. As we left the city limits, the buildings gave way to open fields, and the snow began to fall harder, turning the world into a white blur. The windshield wipers worked frantically, fighting against the heavy flakes accumulating on the glass. I saw the driver's knuckles turn white on the steering wheel, and a knot of tension began to form in my chest. Victoria finally looked up from her screen, sighing with impatience rather than concern. This weather is ridiculous, she murmured, checking her phone again, frowning at the signal bars disappearing one by one. Send a text to the client. Let them know we might be 15 minutes late. I reached for my phone to obey, my hands shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from the residual nervousness of the declined payment earlier. I typed the message fast, praying the internet would work, feeling the weight of her judgment on me even without looking. Suddenly, the car gave a violent jolt, followed by a metallic groaning sound that made my heart jump into my throat. The engine sputtered, coughed like a dying animal, and then simply went silent. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than the howl of the storm outside. The luxury vehicle, a marvel of modern engineering, was now just a useless pile of metal in the middle of a deserted road. "What happened?" Victoria demanded, her tone cutting, as if the car dared to challenge her authority. The driver tried to start the engine again, but there was only a dry, empty click. I looked out the window. All I could see was white, an infinite and blinding wall of snow burying us. I felt panic rise, cold and sharp, mixing with the despair of my financial situation. If we missed this meeting, if the contract was lost because of this, I knew exactly who would serve as the scapegoat. The temperature inside the car began to drop rapidly, the expensive heating dissipating into the ether. Victoria turned to me, her icy blue eyes expecting me to produce a magical solution out of thin air. "Fix this, Maya," she ordered, as if I could control mechanics or the weather with the sheer force of my will. I looked at her, then at the desolate road, and realized with terrifying clarity that her power meant nothing out here. We were stranded, isolated, and the cold was starting to seep into my bones, bringing with it a feeling that this was just the beginning of a very long nightmare. The driver, a sturdy man named Carlos, tried to turn the key in the ignition one more time, but the sound was just a dry and humiliating click. The silence that took over the cabin was instant and heavy, broken only by the muffled howl of the wind shaking the chassis of the luxury car. I saw Carlos's shoulders drop in defeat even before he turned to face us with a terrified look of apology. The heater, which until seconds ago kept that environment artificially pleasant, stopped humming, and I swear I could feel the temperature plummet 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. Victoria let out an exasperated sigh, that characteristic sound she made when an intern brought coffee with the wrong type of milk, as if the mechanical failure were merely a personal incompetence of the vehicle to annoy her. "This is unacceptable, Carlos," said Victoria, her voice sharp as glass, without taking her eyes off the tablet that now displayed an infinite loading circle. "Call the insurance company, request the backup car, and tell them I want a full refund for this inconvenience. We have a schedule to keep, and I do not have time for the drama of a broken radiator or whatever this is." I wanted to laugh, a hysterical and nervous laugh, at her audacity in trying to negotiate with reality. Carlos murmured something about trying to check the engine and got out of the car, immediately being hit by a gust of white wind that almost ripped the door from his hand. I watched him fight against the car hood outside, the snow swallowing his figure in seconds, while Victoria remained motionless beside me, the embodiment of denial. She really believed that her will and her money could bend the laws of physics and make that car move. I decided I needed to see the situation with my own eyes, because standing there smelling her perfume mixed with the rising tension was suffocating me. I opened my door, and the cold hit me like a physical punch to the face, stealing the air from my lungs and making my eyes water instantly. The snow did not just fall. It attacked, coming from all directions, white and blinding. I shoved my hands into the pockets of my cheap coat, feeling the thin fabric fail miserably to protect me, and walked to the front of the vehicle where Carlos looked desolately at a tangle of smoke and metal. "The belt snapped and the alternator is gone, Miss Maya," he shouted to be heard over the wind. his face already red from the cold. "This car is not going anywhere. And with this blizzard, the tow truck, they said they have no estimated time of arrival. The main roads are being closed." I went back inside the car, bringing with me a gust of polar air and snowflakes that landed on the pristine leather upholstery. Victoria looked at me with disgust, flicking a snowflake that dared to land on her silk sleeve with a quick snap of her fingers. The contrast was stark and almost comical. Outside, the world was ending in ice and violence. Inside, she was worried about moisture on her designer clothes. It was in that moment that I realized, with frightening clarity, how useless she was in that scenario. "The car is dead, Victoria," I announced, using her first name without the usual Ms. or boss, the shock making me bold. "Carlos said the roads are closing. The tow truck is not coming. We are stranded." "Do not be ridiculous," she retorted, finally putting down the tablet and picking up her state-of-the-art cell phone. "I will call the company helicopter. If we cannot go by land, we will go by air. It is simple." She dialed a number angrily, brought the device to her ear, and waited. I saw the exact moment her mask cracked. She pulled the phone away, looked at the screen, then at me, her blue eyes widening in a mixture of fury and disbelief. "No signal," she whispered, her voice faltering for the first time. "What do you mean, no signal? I pay for the most expensive plan available on the market. This must be a mistake." She started walking around the interior of the car with her phone, raising her arm, searching for an invisible tower, completely oblivious to the fact that we were in a geographical blind spot, surrounded by miles of forest and nothingness. I felt strangely calm, that resigned calm of someone used to seeing things go wrong and having to make do with what is left. While she panicked over the failing technology, I looked out the rear window, squinting against the infinite white. There was something blinking in the distance, a faint and intermittent light, almost ghostly in the middle of the storm. I narrowed my eyes. It was a neon sign, red and glitching, barely visible through the curtain of snow. "There is something there," I pointed, my voice firm. "It looks like a motel or a gas station. It must be about a mile away. We have to go there, now." Victoria stopped shaking her phone and looked where I was pointing, then looked at her own feet. She was wearing stiletto pumps, shoes made for office carpets and marble floors, not for accumulated snow. Her coat was fine wool, elegant, but purely aesthetic. She looked at my worn but sturdy boots, and for the first time, I saw a flash of real fear cross her face. Her money, her contacts, her CEO status, none of that could carry her through that snow. "I am not walking in that," she said, crossing her arms, trying to regain her commanding posture. "It is dangerous. We will wait here. The heat will come back, or someone will pass by." "The heat is not coming back, Victoria. The engine died," I explained, trying to have patience, as if speaking to my grandmother on bad days. "The temperature is going to drop to sub-zero degrees in less than an hour. If we stay here sitting, dressed like this, we will get hypothermia before nightfall. That sign is our only chance." Carlos nodded, already grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment. Victoria looked at the two of us, realizing that her authority had just been revoked by nature. She had no choice. I saw her swallow hard, pride sticking in her throat, as she grabbed her designer bag as if it were a shield. She opened the car door, and when the wind hit her, she let out a muffled scream, shrinking entirely. We got out of the car, leaving behind the illusory safety of that luxury cocoon. The snow came up to my shins, cold and wet, soaking the hem of my pants instantly, Victoria took the first step and almost fell, her heel sinking and getting stuck in the hidden ice. I grabbed her arm instinctively to steady her, feeling the expensive fabric of her coat under my rough fingers. She did not pull away. She clung to me with desperate strength, her nails digging into my arm. Ahead of us, the sign blinked weakly. The Last Stop Motel. It seemed like a warning, but it was all we had. Walking in the snow at that depth was not just difficult. It was physical torture designed to test every limit of human endurance. The wind blew with a violence I had never felt in the streets protected by Chicago's skyscrapers. A brute force pushing against my chest and making every step feel like a lost battle. The snow was not fluffy or poetic like in Christmas movies. It was crushed ice, hard and relentless, cutting the exposed skin of my face like thousands of tiny needles. I lowered my head, protecting my nose with my cheap synthetic wool scarf, and continued to march, my feet heavy and numb inside the old boots. Beside me, Victoria was living a private hell. Those high heels, which in the office commanded respect and echoed power through the marble halls, were death traps here. Every 2 steps, the thin heel pierced the layer of snow and got stuck in the ice or frozen mud underneath, causing her to stumble violently. I heard her let out a muffled moan of frustration and pain when her ankle turned for the 3rd time in less than 100 yards. She had no balance, no traction, and clearly, no more strength. "Hold on to me," I shouted to be heard over the roar of the storm, without waiting for permission this time. I wrapped my arm firmly around her waist, pulling her body against mine for support. The contact was shocking. Even through the layers of clothes, my thick coat and hers, useless and thin, I felt the rigidity of her body. Victoria Sterling, the woman who never needed anyone, who fired people without blinking and corrected my posture with a look, was literally hanging on to me so as not to fall face first into the snow. She did not resist my touch. On the contrary, she leaned into my side, transferring her weight to me, a silent surrender that screamed how desperate she was. I looked at her feet and felt a pang of anger mixed with strange pity. Snow had already entered her shoes, wetting her thin nylon stockings. Her toes must have been freezing, perhaps already in the process of frostbite if we did not reach shelter soon. I, with my clearance boots bought thinking precisely of durability and not aesthetics, was cold, but I was safe. In that white desert, her bank balance and my junior title meant nothing. Nature was the great equalizer, and it was charging the price for Victoria's arrogance. We walked in a silence forced by the weather for what seemed like hours, although it was probably only 20 minutes. The sound of Victoria's breathing was becoming irregular, short and fast, a worrying wheeze that put me on alert. I felt her trembling against my flank, not light shivers from cold, but violent spasms that shook her entire body, making her teeth chatter audibly. The Ice Queen was breaking, piece by piece, before my eyes. "Almost there, Victoria. Keep walking," I said, more to myself than to her, trying to inject confidence into my voice that I did not feel. The motel sign seemed to mock us, blinking and glitching, appearing never to get closer. She tried to say something, perhaps an order or a habitual complaint, but the words came out as unintelligible babble. I turned my face to check on her, and what I saw scared me. Her lips, always painted an impeccable red or sophisticated nude, were pale, almost purple. The skin of her face was gray, and her blue eyes, usually so focused and intimidating, looked glazed, lost in the whiteness around us. She was going into thermal shock, and the icy fear that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the wind. I quickened the pace, practically dragging her with me, the anger I felt towards her in the office, the resentment for the daily humiliations. All of that seemed distant and irrelevant now. In that moment, she was not my cruel boss. She was just a fragile human woman who was freezing to death in my arms. I felt a protective instinct emerge from nowhere, a fierce will to keep her standing, to keep her alive, which surprised me by its intensity. Finally, the structure of the last stop motel emerged from the white fog, an L-shaped single-story building that looked like it had been abandoned in the 70s and forgotten by time. The beige paint on the walls was peeling, the windows were dirty, and there was an air of desolation that, on any other day, would make me run in the opposite direction. But today, seeing the weak yellow light coming from the reception, it looked like the most luxurious palace on earth. We climbed the 3 concrete steps of the entrance, Victoria stumbling on the last one and almost taking us both to the ground, but I managed to steady us at the last second. Carlos came right behind, panting, carrying her Italian leather suitcases which were now covered in muddy snow. I reached for the cold metal handle of the glass door, praying it wasn't locked, praying there was warmth on the other side. The door yielded with a sharp creak of rusty hinges, and we practically fell into the lobby. The heat hit us like a solid wall, a thermal shock that made my skin tingle painfully. The smell of the place was a stagnant mix of old cigarettes, cheap pine disinfectant, and accumulated dust, an aroma that stuck to the back of the throat. Victoria let go of me as soon as she felt the firm, dry floor under her feet, staggering to the reception counter and leaning on it with both hands so as not to fall. She was breathing with difficulty, her chest rising and falling rapidly, trying to regain the composure she had lost in the snow. Behind the counter, an elderly man in a flannel shirt and a trucker hat looked up from a small tube television. He stared at us with an expression of total indifference, chewing on a toothpick, as if 2 frozen women and an exhausted driver entering his establishment during a blizzard was the most boring thing to happen to him all week. The lobby of the Last Stop Motel was a time capsule of bad taste, decorated with dark wood panels that absorbed the little light from the yellow fluorescent bulbs. There was a vending machine humming loudly in a corner, displaying sun-faded chip packets, and a torn synthetic leather sofa where yellow foam leaked out like an open wound. Victoria looked around with genuine horror, her nose wrinkled as if she were physically smelling failure. For a woman used to marble lobbies with fresh orchid arrangements changed daily, this place must have looked like purgatory. She tried to compose herself, running a shaking hand through her wet hair to put it back in place, an automatic gesture of vanity that seemed ridiculous given the circumstances. She lifted her chin, invoking that untouchable CEO persona I knew so well, and marched to the counter with what little dignity she had left. Her expensive shoes made a wet, sad sound on the grimy linoleum, leaving muddy footprints behind, but she ignored it, acting as if she were about to check in at the Four Seasons. "Good evening," she said, her voice still hoarse from the cold, but charged with that imperative authority. "We need rooms, 2 executive rooms if possible, and have someone bring our luggage from the car outside." The receptionist didn't even blink. He kept chewing the toothpick, moving it from one corner of his mouth to the other with infuriating slowness. He looked Victoria up and down, noting the soaked silk clothes, the slightly smudged makeup, and the arrogant posture that didn't match the disaster situation. He let out a short, dry laugh, more like a cough. "Executive?" he repeated, as if the word were an inside joke only he understood. "Lady, the only thing executive here is me executing the cleaning when my back allows it, and there is no porter. What we have is a room left at the back, number 4. The boiler blew in the others. Take it or leave it." Victoria opened her mouth to object, probably to demand to speak to the manager, but the reality of the cold still emanating from her bones silenced her. She had no bargaining power there. Carlos, the driver, approached timidly, taking off his cap. "Miss Sterling, I can stay here in the lobby, on the sofa. You two take the room. I just need to warm up a bit." The receptionist shrugged, indifferent to the arrangement, returning his attention to the TV. "Very well," said Victoria, with a heavy sigh of resignation. She opened her designer bag, fumbling with fingers still stiff from the cold, and pulled out her fine leather wallet. From there, she extracted the legendary American Express Centurion card, the famous black card. That piece of black titanium was a symbol of absolute status, capable of buying cars, international trips, and theoretically, opening any door she wanted. She placed it on the dirty counter with a metallic snap, expecting the magical object to solve everything. The old man looked at the card as if it were an alien artifact. He pointed a calloused finger at an old card machine, one of those bulky beige ones, which looked like it had survived 2 wars. There was a red light blinking on it, and a piece of masking tape stuck with the words, "System down," written in permanent marker. "No system, lady. The storm took down the phone line and the internet. Cash only." Victoria froze. I saw a real panic rise in her eyes for the first time, more intense than when the car broke down. For people like her, physical money is obsolete, something dirty that only common people carry. Her world is digital, invisible transactions of millions of dollars. She looked at the open wallet, empty of bills. She looked at Carlos. He turned out his pockets, pulling out only a few coins and a pack of cigarettes. I do not have cash," she stammered, humiliation coloring her pale cheeks a bright red. She pushed the black card toward the man again, desperate. "Look, this card has an unlimited limit. You can write down the numbers. I will pay triple tomorrow when the system comes back. Please. I do not work on credit, and I do not work on promises." The man was relentless, crossing his arms. $50 for the night. If you do not have it, there's the door. You can go back to the snow. The silence that fell over us was agonizing. Victoria Sterling, the woman who appeared on the cover of Forbes, was being shooed away from a roadside motel for not having $50. She hunched her shoulders, looking physically smaller, defeated by an analog bureaucracy she could not control. She looked at me, and in her gaze there was no order, just a mute and humiliating plea for help. I sighed, reaching into the inside pocket of my coat. My fingers touched the envelope where I kept my rent money, the cash I had withdrawn earlier to try to negotiate with the landlord in case the transfer didn't go through. They were crumpled, counted, sweated over bills. That money was my survival, and now I was going to spend it to save the woman who signed my checks, but didn't pay me enough to live with dignity. The irony had a bitter taste in my mouth. I pulled out a $50 bill, old and soft from use, and placed it on the counter, next to Victoria's useless titanium card. The visual contrast was a perfect summary of our lives. Her power was theoretical and fragile. Mine was real, dirty, and immediate. "One room," I said, my voice firm. "And extra blankets if you have them." The receptionist took the bill, checked it against the light to see if it wasn't counterfeit, a final insult, and tossed a heavy key with a yellow plastic keychain onto the counter. "Room 4. It is at the end of the external hallway. Watch out for the ice." Victoria looked at the $50 bill disappearing into the cash drawer, as if she were watching a miracle. Then, she looked at me, There was no explicit gratitude, because she didn't know how to express that without feeling inferior. But there was shock. She had just been bankrolled by the assistant she despised. She collected the black card quickly, hiding it in her bag as if it were evidence of a crime, and grabbed the key from the counter before I could reach it. "I will pay you back later," she muttered, not looking me in the eye, turning toward the side exit that led to the rooms. I followed Victoria out of the lobby, back into the biting cold of the external hallway. The wind howled, shaking the loose gutters on the roof. As we walked toward the door with the peeling number 4, a terrifying thought occurred to me. The receptionist had said, 1 room. He didn't say 2 beds. I looked at Victoria's rigid back in front of me and felt a cold pit in my stomach that had nothing to do with the snow. We were about to find out how small that room really was. The sound of the metal key turning in the jammed lock was loud and harsh, echoing in the empty hallway like the closing of a prison cell. I had to use both hands and push the door with my shoulder so that the wood, swollen by humidity, would yield, finally revealing the interior of room number 4. My expectation of a heated sanctuary died the instant we crossed the threshold. The air inside was stagnant, carrying a damp chill that seemed to penetrate deeper than the wind outside. Victoria entered right behind me, her steps hesitant, as if she were entering a crime scene and not a hotel room. I fumbled on the wall for the switch, my numb fingers brushing against textured wallpaper that was peeling at the corners. The fluorescent light on the ceiling flickered once, twice, before buzzing and illuminating the space with a white, clinical glow that did no favors for the decor. The room was tiny, a claustrophobic box paneled in fake dark wood that absorbed the little light, with brown flower-patterned polyester curtains that looked like they hadn't been washed since the 90s. The smell was an aggressive mix of industrial pine cleaner, old dust, and that unmistakable odor of places closed up for a long time. And then, our eyes landed simultaneously on the centerpiece of the room, the detail that turned that logistical inconvenience into an absolute personal disaster. Pushed against the opposite wall, taking up almost all the usable space in the room, was a single bed. It wasn't a king size, not even a spacious queen where we could build a barrier of pillows and keep a safe distance. It was a standard full-size bed, with a mattress that seemed to sag in the middle and a beige synthetic quilt that screamed mediocrity. Victoria stopped abruptly in the middle of the room, her designer bag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the worn carpet with a dull thud. She stared at the bed with an expression of pure horror, lips parted in shocked silence. I could see her brain trying to process the information, trying to recalculate the variables, but the math was ruthless. 2 women, 1 narrow bed. The sacred hierarchy between boss and employee, which kept us separated by glass desks and closed doors, had just been demolished by a piece of cheap furniture. The silence in the room stretched, becoming thick and suffocating. I looked at the corner of the room, where an old heating unit was installed under the window. I walked over there with desperate hope and turned the thermostat dial to the maximum. Nothing happened. Not a breath of air, not a hum of an engine, not the comforting click of metal heating up. I placed my hand over the air vent and felt only the ice of the metal. The receptionist hadn't lied. The boiler was dead, and the room was basically a decorated freezer. "It is broken," I announced, my voice coming out in a tense whisper that formed a cloud of vapor in the cold air. "There is no heat, Victoria." She didn't answer immediately. She was still looking at the bed, and then she shifted her gaze to me, a slow and uncomfortable assessment. I saw the exact moment when exhaustion began to defeat her pride. Her shoulders slumped, her rigid posture crumbled slightly, and she hugged her own body, rubbing her arms covered by thin silk in a futile attempt to generate heat. She looked smaller there, without her executive desk and ergonomic chair to elevate her above me. Panic began to bubble in my stomach. The idea of sharing that tiny space with her was already terrifying, but the forced intimacy of sharing a mattress was unthinkable. I remembered all the times she criticized my work, all the times I felt tiny under her gaze. How could I close my eyes and sleep next to the woman who held my financial future in her hands? How could I relax knowing that any wrong move, any snoring during sleep, could be grounds for firing on Monday? My corporate survival instinct kicked in. I needed to maintain the natural order of things. She was the queen, I was the commoner. She got comfort, I got the rest. That was how the world worked, and that was how I would ensure my job was safe when this storm passed. I looked at the floor, at the thin, stained carpet covering the icy concrete, and made my decision. "I will sleep on the floor," I blurted out, the words coming fast before I could regret them. I pointed to the narrow space between the bed and the wall, where the carpet looked a little less dirty. "You take the bed. I can grab the cushions from the armchair and make a nest there. I am wearing thicker clothes. I will be fine." Victoria turned her head slowly to face me, a perfectly arched eyebrow rising on her forehead. She looked at the spot I had indicated, a patch of floor where probably 1,000 strangers had stepped with boots dirty from snow, and then looked back at me. There was something undecipherable in her look, a mixture of disbelief and perhaps, deep down, a hint of offense. "You are going to sleep on the floor?" she repeated, tone flat, dry. "On this filthy carpet? In this temperature?" "It is the best solution," I insisted, already starting to unbutton my coat to use it as a blanket, trying to show initiative, trying to be the efficient assistant who solves problems. "You need to rest for the meeting, if we manage to get there. I will manage. I have slept in worse places." This wasn't a lie, but saying it aloud to a woman who probably never slept on anything with less than 1,000 thread count seemed to expose my precarious reality too much. I started to pull the only armchair in the room, dragging it loudly, avoiding looking at her. I was willing to sacrifice myself, to spend the night shivering on the hard floor, if it meant keeping the safe distance my sanity required. I was building my little barricade of poverty and servitude, constructing an invisible wall between us so that tomorrow we could pretend none of this had happened. But then, I heard the sound of the door lock turning. Victoria had locked the door behind us, and was now standing in the middle of the room, blocking my path with a presence that filled the tiny space. She started unbuttoning the cuffs of her silk blouse with precise, irritated movements, eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me drop the cushion I was holding. "Do not be a martyr, Maya. It is pathetic," she said, her voice regaining that sharp edge of command. "We are trapped in a blizzard, in a room that is rapidly turning into a refrigerator. We are 2 adult women. We can share a spring mattress without the world ending because of it." She took a step toward me, invading my personal space. "Get off that dirty floor now. No one sleeps on the carpet under my watch." The sound of thin silk brushing against goosebumped skin in that freezing room is something that, even years later, still echoes in my memory with disturbing clarity. It was the sound of armor being stripped away, not out of desire, but out of pure, cruel necessity. I got up from the floor slowly, dusting off the knees of my jeans, feeling strangely scolded and, at the same time, validated by her order. Victoria would not accept my pity or my sacrifice, because accepting that I sleep on the floor would be admitting the situation was desperate, and Victoria Sterling didn't do desperate. She did crisis management. She turned her back to me, shaking fingers working on the heavy buttons of her Italian wool coat. The piece, now soaked with melted snow and weighing pounds, slipped off her shoulders and hit the floor with a dull, wet thud, like a dead animal being discarded. I expected to see a structured blazer underneath, or maybe a cashmere sweater, the kind that cost 3 months of my salary. But when the coat fell, what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. Victoria was wearing only a pearl-colored silk blouse, a fabric so thin and delicate it seemed almost liquid against her skin. It was a stunning piece for an air-conditioned boardroom or a candlelight dinner, with long flowing sleeves and a sophisticated high collar. But here, in that room rapidly becoming an industrial freezer, that blouse was a death sentence. The silk offered absolutely no protection. It was as if she were naked against the frigid air. I saw the exact moment the brutal cold of the room hit her without the barrier of the coat. Her body suffered a violent spasm, an involuntary contraction that ran down her spine from top to bottom. Through the translucent fabric on her back, I could see her skin prickling instantly, every hair standing up in silent protest against the temperature. Her shoulder blades, sharp and elegant, trembled visibly, moving under her pale skin like the wings of a trapped bird. She hugged her own body tightly, crossing her arms over her chest in a futile attempt to conserve what little heat remained. The silence of the room was broken by a sound I never imagined hearing from the most controlled woman I knew: the rhythmic, uncontrollable chattering of her teeth. It was a dry, mechanical sound. Click, 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 betraying all the effort she was making to keep her posture straight and her chin up. The Ice Queen was, ironically, losing the battle against the very element that seemed to define her. I felt suddenly huge and clumsy in my thick knit sweater and thermal shirt underneath. My clothes were ugly, cheap, and bulky. But in that moment, they were a luxury Victoria did not possess. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the tyrant boss who rejected my projects. I saw a physically fragile woman, exposed and painfully human. Her perfection, always so intimidating, now seemed breakable, like a porcelain doll left outside in a storm. "I'm going to lie down," she announced, her voice coming out strangled and thin, without turning to me. She didn't want me to see her face, I knew. She didn't want me to see the purple lips or the fear in her eyes. She walked to the bed with stiff steps, her legs shaking so much I feared she would fall before reaching the mattress. She pulled back the beige synthetic quilt violently, as if angry at the object, and climbed under it without even taking off her shoes or pants. She curled up in a fetal position, facing the wall, pulling the cover up to her chin, creating a cocoon where only the top of her perfect blonde hair remained visible. The old spring mattress groaned under her weight, a sad, metallic sound. I stood in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do. There was an empty space in the bed, my side, but the invisible barrier between us seemed thicker than ever. Lying there felt like a transgression, an invasion of an intimacy she was desperately trying to protect, even as her body failed. The cold was getting more aggressive. I could see my own breath coming out in dense white clouds with every exhalation. The windows, which previously only showed snow, were now starting to form ice crystals on the inside of the glass. The wind outside howled like a hungry pack of wolves, shaking the fragile structure of the motel, making the walls creak. Victoria continued to shake under the quilt. I could see the mound of her body vibrating, shaking the beige fabric in rapid, constant waves. The sound of her teeth chattering had stopped, probably because she was biting her own lip or clenching her jaw with full force to force silence. The loneliness of that image, her curled up, trying to warm herself alone with her arrogance and thin silk, gave me a tightness in my chest. I walked to the armchair and sat on the edge, still dressed in my coat, watching her back. I wondered if she could sleep, if her body could generate enough heat to stop the tremors. I wondered if we should have insisted more with the receptionist for a portable heater, even knowing the answer would be no. The helplessness of the situation weighed on me. Suddenly, the fluorescent light on the ceiling emitted a loud, high-pitched buzz, like a dying insect. The light flickered once, casting the room into distorted shadows, then flickered again, harder. Victoria moved in the bed, a sharp movement of alert, and then, with a final pop, the light went out completely, plunging the room into absolute, terrifying darkness, broken only by the ghostly, bluish glow of the snow outside. The electrical system had finally yielded to the storm, taking with it the last illusion of safety we had. The darkness that took over the room was not just the absence of light. It was as if the world had disappeared, leaving just the two of us trapped in an icebox floating in the void. Without the electric hum of the lamp or the distant noise of working appliances, the silence inside the room became absolute and oppressive, amplifying the furious roar of the storm outside. The only illumination came from the window, a spectral, bluish glow reflected by the snow, painting the room with long, distorted shadows, turning the old furniture into menacing shapes. I remained seated in the armchair for a few minutes, my eyes trying desperately to adjust to the gloom. The cold, which was previously an uncomfortable presence, now became a physical and aggressive entity. I could feel it crawling along the floor, up my legs, seeking any gap in my coat to bite my skin. The temperature was dropping at a dizzying speed. Every time I breathed, the icy air burned the inside of my nostrils and throat, and I could see the dense clouds of vapor leaving my mouth, hovering in the still air like ghosts. I paid attention to the sound coming from the bed. Minutes before, the chattering of Victoria's teeth and the rustling of the synthetic quilt were constant, a frantic rhythm of someone fighting to stay warm. But now, there was only silence, a deep, still silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The logical part of my brain tried to convince me that she had finally managed to sleep, overcome by the exhaustion of the day. But my instinct, honed by years of caring for my sick grandmother, screamed that something was wrong. No one stops shivering that fast in this cold unless the body has given up fighting. "Victoria," I called out, my voice coming out shaky and small in the darkness. No answer. Not a grumble, not the sound of fabric moving. Just the wind howling outside, beating against the glass as if wanting to come in to finish the job. I got up from the armchair, my boots making a muffled sound on the frozen carpet. I felt my way to the bed, guided only by the ghostly blue light from the window. When I reached the edge of the mattress, my eyes had adjusted enough to distinguish her shape. Victoria was motionless, still curled in a fetal position, but the tension that held her body rigid before seemed to have disappeared. She looked like an ice statue, left there, forgotten. I reached out a hesitant hand toward her, my fingers hovering over her shoulder covered by the thin quilt. When I touched her, the fright was immediate. Even through the cheap synthetic fabric, I could feel there was no heat emanating from her. It was like touching a stone left out in the open in winter. "Victoria, do you hear me?" I insisted, shaking her shoulder lightly. She moved, but it was a slow, dragged movement, as if she were moving underwater. She turned her face toward me, but in the gloom, her eyes seemed not to focus on anything. They were open, but glazed, looking through me at some distant point on the dark ceiling. "I am tired," she whispered. The voice was no longer that imperative, sharp tone I knew. It was a weak, thick breath, the words dragging out of her mouth as if her tongue were too heavy. Just need to sleep a little, Maya. Turn off the light. It is too bright. Panic exploded in my chest, hot and violent. The room was plunged in total darkness. There was no light to turn off. The mental confusion, the lethargy, the sudden stop of tremors. I knew exactly what that meant. These were the classic symptoms of moderate hypothermia, advancing to severe. Her body, with no fat reserves and protected only by useless silk, had stopped trying to generate heat and was starting to shut down vital organs to preserve the brain. No, you cannot sleep, I said, my tone rising an octave, fear taking over. Victoria, wake up. It is dark. There is no light. You are freezing. She didn't answer. Her eyelids began to weigh down, closing slowly as if pulled by lead weights. She sighed, a long shuddering sound, and her body relaxed even more on the mattress, sinking into the unconsciousness that precedes the end. She was giving up. The Iron Lady, the invincible CEO, was fading in front of me, being consumed by the silent cold of that cursed room. I took off my glove and touched her cheek directly. Her skin was icy, waxy, shocking to the touch. There was no flush, no life. It was the temperature of a corpse. If I did nothing, if I kept professional distance and stayed in my armchair, she would not wake up the next morning. I would be the only one leaving that room alive, carrying the guilt of having let my boss die 2 feet away from me because of decorum and resentment. The fear of losing her, not the boss who signed checks, but the woman who was there, vulnerable and alone, overcame any other emotion. The anger, the hurt, the fear of being fired, all became irrelevant in the face of the urgency of her life slipping away. I needed to act. The motel's thin blankets would not be enough. My coat thrown over her would not be enough. She needed an active, immediate, and constant source of heat. I looked at the narrow bed, at the empty space beside her that looked like an abyss of social rules and professional barriers. But biology didn't care about corporate hierarchies. Biology demanded heat. And the only source of heat in that room, the only thing that could pull her back from that frozen edge, was me. I took a deep breath, the icy air burning my lungs, and made the decision that would change everything. There was no more room for hesitation. There was no more room for Maya, the assistant. Now, it was just survival. I leaned over her, my firm voice cutting the darkness, a desperate order to the universe and to her. Victoria, wake up! My voice came out as a command, harsh with fear, breaking the deadly silence of the room. I didn't wait for an answer I knew wouldn't come. With shaking, clumsy hands, I began to take off my own boots, kicking them away on the dark carpet. The noise of them hitting the floor sounded strangely loud, like warning shots. Next, I unbuttoned my heavy coat. I knew that to warm her, I needed to eliminate barriers. Heat wouldn't pass through layers of wool and synthetic filling. I needed to be the thermal source she could no longer be. I threw the coat over her feet, trying to create any extra layer of insulation, and climbed onto the mattress. The old springs groaned loudly under my weight, a metallic sound of protest that made Victoria move minimally, just a frown in the darkness. The side of the bed where I entered was freezing, the sheets feeling like frozen sandpaper against my skin, but I ignored the thermal shock. I dragged myself to her, invading the sacred space that social hierarchy had built between us, until my knees touched her back. Maya, she whispered, the name coming out as a breath of confusion, eyes still closed. She must have been delirious, lost between sleep and hypothermia, not understanding why her assistant was there, so close, violating all the unspoken rules of our employment contract. "You are going into hypothermia, Victoria," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady so as not to scare her, but failing miserably. "Your body stopped shivering. You need heat. Now." She didn't argue. She didn't tell me to leave. She didn't make a sarcastic comment about professional boundaries. The arrogance that had always been her armor had melted, leaving only a raw, desperate human need. She tried to turn to me, but the movement was weak, clumsy. I saw the faint shine of her eyes in the bluish gloom, focusing on my face with an intensity that disarmed me. There was no anger there. There was fear. And there was a silent acknowledgement that without me, she wouldn't see the dawn. "I am so cold," she admitted, her voice cracking on the last word. An admission of weakness I never imagined hearing from the woman who seemed made of steel. "I know," I replied, moving closer, hesitating for a millisecond before pressing my body along her back. The contact was a shock. She was cold as marble, instantly sucking the heat from my skin through my clothes. It was like hugging a block of ice, but I didn't pull back. I forced myself to stay there, to be the wall against which she could lean. It was then that she did something that stopped my heart in my chest. Instead of remaining passive, she reacted. With visible effort, she reached back, groping in the dark until she found my waist. Her hand, icy and firm, grabbed the fabric of my shirt and pulled me. It wasn't a gentle tug. It was a movement of necessity, of survival. "Get closer," she commanded, her voice gaining a thread of that habitual authority, but now hoarse and intimate, whispered against the pillow. "It is biology, Maya. Body heat. Do not be shy now." I obeyed. I slid across the mattress until there was no more space between us. I pressed my chest against her back, my legs intertwining with hers, enveloping her completely. I draped my arm over her, pulling her against me, turning my body into a human shield against the cruel winter trying to enter through the window cracks. The moment our bodies glued together, something changed in the atmosphere of the room. The cutting cold seemed to retreat, expelled by friction and proximity. I could feel every curve of her, the stiffness of her shoulders starting to yield, the rhythm of her breathing trying to synchronize with mine. Her scent, that expensive vanilla and sandalwood perfume, was now mixed with something more natural and sweet. The scent of her skin, which invaded my lungs and made me dizzy. Victoria let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of pure relief that vibrated through my chest. She took my hand, which was on her stomach, and interlaced her fingers with mine. Her hand was small and cold, but the grip was strong, possessive. She wasn't just holding my hand to warm up. She was holding me there, stopping me from leaving, anchoring me to that bed with her. We lay there, still in the dark, the silence of the room broken only by the sound of the wind and our mixed breathing. The barrier between boss and employee, between rich and poor, between the powerful and the invisible, had dissolved in the darkness of that room number 4. There, we were just two bodies trying to survive, two women seeking comfort in the abyss. And then, it happened. Her shivering returned, but different. It wasn't the violent spasms of hypothermia, but a fine tremor that ran through her body when I tightened the embrace, involuntarily brushing my nose against the back of her neck. She turned her head slightly back, seeking my face in the dark, and even without seeing her eyes, I felt the shift. The air between us became heavy, charged with static electricity that didn't come from the storm. "Thank you," she whispered, so low I almost missed it. But it wasn't the gratitude that made my stomach drop. It was the way she settled against me, fitting perfectly into my curves as if she had been made to be there. I closed my eyes, feeling the world spin slowly. I entered that bed to save her from the cold, to ensure my boss survived the night. But while the heat of my body passed to hers, and her hand gripped mine tightly, I realized with delicious terror that the danger had changed shape. I was no longer afraid of freezing. There, in the arms of the woman I swore I hated, I was, for the first time in my life, feeling the start of a fire. I didn't know it, but that embrace was just the beginning. What happened next, when the ice melted and darkness took over, changed our lives forever. The continuation of this night you will hear very soon.